Okay. Oh, okay. So how do I internalize beliefs that my subconscious disagrees with? Okay, so you have some core beliefs about the world, right? Like you have some beliefs about how stuff works. Like psychologically, what gets us therapists all hot and bothered is like, oh, like I don't love myself. And it's like, oh yeah, like tell me more. I'm like, yeah, like tell me more about how you don't love yourself. That's the kind of like core belief that people have, right? And so someone's asking like logically, sure, you can, this is the way I understand that question. Logically, you can understand that you should love yourself, but you can't change the fact that you don't love yourself. So how do you change this idea that like, you should love yourself, you should be your best friend, you should treat yourself with respect, but you're unable to. So how do you change that? And so I think the best way to actually change this is a practice called Yoga Nidra, which is on our YouTube, which you guys can go back and watch. But this is what I want y'all to think about for a second. So how do we like learn? How does something change within our mind? How do we learn things? So I want you guys to think about if I'm studying a textbook and I read everything on the page, I don't necessarily understand. I don't understand the information, right? Like I can read the information, but I don't get it. So just think about this for a second. And then what happens is I read the page again, and I read the page again, and the fourth time I read the page, I get it. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? So there's a difference between like reading the information and getting it. So let's just think about that, because like sometimes you read the page once and you get it. So like just stop, because this blows my mind. So one day I was thinking about this, and I was like, holy shit. If I could figure out why sometimes I can read the page once and get it, and sometimes I read the page 10 times and I don't get it, like how the fuck does that work? And if I can figure out how that works, can I create a situation where I'm reading the page once every single time and I'm getting it? And how OP would that be? How OP would it be to read something and to understand it every single time? And I actually investigated it. And I figured it out. And then, thankfully, I went to med school. And I studied 2 hours a day in med school. No more. Sometimes I studied more before a test or over the weekend. 2 hours a day. All of my friends studying 5 hours a day, 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day. Staying up super late, tons of caffeine. I studied 2 fucking hours a day. That's it. And then people say, oh, aren't you so smart, man? Like, oh my God, you must be a fucking genius. No, I'm not a fucking genius. This is important because you guys have done it too, right? You've read a page sometimes and it sinks in, and other times it doesn't sink in. The only difference is I figured out what the difference between the two is. I figured out why I'm able to have it sink in and why other times it isn't. So now I'm going to ask you, no, you guys want the fucking answer? Too bad. I'm not going to tell you. You're going to figure it out. So I'm going to ask you guys, what do you think? So in what scenario could I read something 10 times and not understand it? You tell me. Okay, so let's say that I'm in a library and the library is burning down, right? So people are saying distracted. Okay, chat, calm down. Distracted, right? So like let's say that I'm studying and I just got broken up with my girlfriend just dumped me. How many times am I going to have to read the page to understand it? Absolutely. So just think about that. So then let's say that, so this is what I did in med school. I would wake up at between 4 and 4:30 every day. And I would study between like 4:30 and 6:30 or 5 and 7. Did it first thing in the morning when my mind was completely clear. And I found that was when my mind was the most focused. And I would meditate and do yoga in the morning. Super focused mind. Sit down and study. And I found that like 4 a.m., absolutely. 4 a.m. Then I would study whatever the class was going to cover that day. I'd go through it before class. And then class became review. And if you guys want to know what's OP in school, it's having every day's class be a review. Instead of having a review session, like you guys know how good a review session is before a test, right? Imagine every day of class was a review session. Becomes easy. And then the review session is like, when you study for a test and you're like, man, I wish I could have gone to like 2 review sessions. Like, wouldn't it be cool? Like, imagine how well you would do on a test if instead of just having 1 review session before the test, you had like 2 review sessions a week apart. Like, how easy would school be? Be like way easier, right? So class became the review session, and then the review session became the second review session. So I did pretty well. I didn't get straight A's in med school. I wasn't at the top of my class, but I did good enough. Right? There were some people who like did amazing. Like I wasn't at the top of my class, didn't get like a stellar step score. I mean, I got a pretty good step score, but it wasn't like anything crazy. If I wanted to become like an orthopedic surgeon, like it would have been, I would have been in the running, but it wouldn't have been like a lock. I mean, I had some friends who were just fucking geniuses. So it's all about the state of mind. If you want something to sink into your mind and plant there and understand it, it's about the state of mind. So this is important. So I want you guys to imagine your mind like a pool of water that has dirt in it. And if you want to see to the bottom, which is what we kind of think of as the subconscious, the more that the water is moving, the more dirt is going to be stirred. So you need a still mind. So when I get dumped by my girlfriend or the library is on fire, what is happening in my mind? There's a lot of activity. So anything I try to put in there is not going to sink in because there's just all this shit in the way. So calm the mind, and then you can plant something. Then you could plant it deep, right? Sometimes you have a conversation with someone, and you are so tuned into that conversation that experience fucking sinks in. Like, I remember for me, this is going to sound weird. I remember for me, like, an experience that sunk in, and I was like, this transformed, like, the way that I looked in the world, is in FF2 or FF4, Japanese. There's this guy named Cecil, and he's a Dark Knight, and he becomes a fucking paladin. And that was, like, just the coolest thing in the world. And my mind was focused. And that thought, that scene, that experience got planted so deep into my mind, it can never be forgotten. And along with that was like all of this weird stuff about like salvation and like you can make it and you can recover your life. And all that shit started with Cecil. FF4. Dark Knight, right? And so you've got to be focused. A focused mind will lead to change. And we can see that with if you guys watch the interview today, like you could tell after he meditated, like it didn't sink in because he's just got all his thoughts. His thoughts are in the way. So how do you internalize, how do you take the things that you should believe and get them to a place from where your core beliefs are? So core beliefs are deep within your mind. And so there's a practice called Yoga Nidra, which calms the mind on the surface level. And then this is a part of Yoga Nidra that I haven't taught. Then you have something called a Sankalp. And like when you do Yoga Nidra and you do it well, you're like rewriting the code of your subconscious. So this is the other thing to understand. You guys understand, like, you have a mind, right? And like it sends thoughts up to you. It just like sends you shit from time to time. And depending on who you are, those thoughts are different. Like when I'm walking down the street, I have a particular desire for something that someone else won't have because of what my mind is. It's like, oh wow, like I smell rosemary. That smells delicious. There's something in my subconscious mind that likes rosemary. Other people don't like the smell of rosemary. Other people like lavender. Other people like patchouli. Other people like rose. You know, there's all kinds of stuff. So your mind sends you all kinds of thoughts, like all the time. I know it sounds like super basic, but just stop and think about this for a second. When you're somewhere, your mind is going to be sending you thoughts that other people aren't going to have. That means that they're coming from somewhere. It's not like universal. Your mind is specific and it sends you thoughts. This is why people have different complexes, right? This is why like some people get anxious. Some people get depressed. Some people get anxious about something. Some people get anxious about another thing. That's because it's all coming from somewhere in your mind. So in order to get to that part of the mind, we need it to sink in. So if you calm your mind and then you tell yourself something, it's going to sink in. And then something cool starts to happen. In the same way that these negative thoughts about yourself bubble up to the surface and you have to fight them, good thoughts start to bubble up. When you start to meditate regularly and you use a sankalp is kind of like it's like a statement that you make about yourself. And you plant it down there. So like, just think about this. You have a core belief that makes you think you're lazy, right? And so it bubbles up from the surface from time to time. It's like, oh yeah, like, man, I'm lazy. Fuck, I'm lazy. Fuck, I'm lazy. And if we think about the interview today, he has the thought that I'm in control of myself. I can control my destiny. And there are times that thought bubbles up in a positive way. And it's actually a different thought, but at times it bubbles up in a negative way. He thinks that's the same thought. It's actually two separate thoughts. That like, oh, like I controlled my destiny, therefore I fucked it up, therefore I suck at life. Or I control my destiny, I can do anything that I put my mind to. Life is full of love and greatness, right? So if you do yoga nidra and you plant a sankalpa, if you flatten your mind, you do a mantra is another example, right? So you do a mantra, and then you plant it deep within your subconscious. And then something really magical happens. I'm a lazy piece of shit. I'm actually pretty good at what I put my mind to. It becomes automatic. And then change happens. It's not about control. It's not about willpower. Because right now you guys are fighting to overcome that negative thought. Every time it comes up, you try to push it down. Every time it comes up, you try to push it down. Every time it comes up, you try to push it down. Instead, plant something else down there. Plant something inspirational. And you do that with a calm mind, because once the mind is calm, just like you're reading something, you can read something and it sinks in. It goes in. You learn that 2 plus 2 is 4. And then when your mind sees, 2 plus 2, the answer bubbles up. This is important. You don't think about it being 4. The answer comes from within. It's automatic. It doesn't require effort. Once you understand, it's just effort. It's effortless. It's not control. So learn how to plant things within yourself. Calm your mind, and then you can do a mantra or you can do a sankalp. And I think yoga nidra is one of the most potent techniques to get people to a super calm mind relatively easily, and then you do a sankalp. So after you enter the state of like neutralness, at the end of the yoga nidra practice, you make a sankalp for yourself, and then you tell yourself that. Right? So it's like, I deserve to cut myself a break. Like, that's a good example of a sankalp. Like, you have to figure out what the right sankalp is for you. And then each time you do that practice, that thought lands into your subconscious, and it grows more and more and more. And then eventually it starts bubbling up. And now we come back to the why meditate, and how does that make people holy? It's because when you meditate, and you combine it with some of these practices, although you don't have to. When you meditate, like, you change that subsurface level of self. It's underneath the mind, right? Because remember, meditation is about shutting off the mind. Then you can start writing, like you're accessing the source code, right? It's like if you hit F11 when you're looking at a website and you see all the HTML code and you start editing shit over there. Meditation lets you edit that shit on the side. That's what it does. And so if you want to start changing your subconscious beliefs, it starts with calming the mind and then reflecting and then planting. And then as you plant, it'll start to bubble up. And then your life is different. So people look at me and they're like, oh man, like, you guys think I'm happy? Like, I'm happy most days, right? Like, day to day. Like, today I'm actually having a rough day. This is me on a rough day. And I have rough days too. But the difference is that I've planted shit in my subconscious that bubbles up. It's like autopilot. It's like a permanent buff. It's like you have debuffs and you have buffs, right? So I've had the privilege and the luck to plant some good things in myself. It's like a food buff, but it's permanent. You know, like sometimes when you play an RPG and like, I like these games that do this, that you get like some kind of permanent buff because you make a choice in the story, right? And it's like plus $5 stats because you consumed someone's soul. It's like, that's the kind of shit that I'm talking about. Talk about a permanent buff. It's not quite leveling up, but it's like a transformative experience that changes the person that you are and gives you like a plus 5 on like, or it gives you like 10% lifesteal or like plus 5 on all your stats or something like that. That's what meditation does. So a sankalp is a particular kind of buff that you get to choose. So like sometimes like, you know, when you're when you're playing an RPG and you like get a boon and they're like, what do you want? Do you want a +5 to int, strength, con, dex, magic item? Like you get a prize, right? And so the Sankalp is like the kind of thing that you want. Do you want to practice self-forgiveness? Do you want to practice motivation? Do you want to practice whatever? So people are now asking, how do you choose the Sankalp? I think it requires reflection. So you've got to think about something that it shouldn't change rapidly. So you want to do a Sankalp like for a year. And it should be something that like you should want to reinforce. So it shouldn't be like temporary. So one example of a Sankalp that I used with a patient who had suffered from a lot of trauma is I deserve to be whole. So I think that worked really well for her. You can't plant good luck. Or at least I haven't figured out how to do that yet. Maybe you can. That's not the way that I work. I tend to focus on the self. So I'm all about like character creation and buffing the character. Good luck is like a server-wide thing, right? Good luck is not something you control. It's not about you. So there are people who do that kind of spirituality. It's just not mine. Because I don't trust the server. I trust myself. I trust my stats, and I try to buff myself. That's what this is about. Like, that's like server-wide changes. Like, good luck is like going and editing the server to like, make cheat drop rates or something like that. Like, that's not, I don't know how to do that. There is a way to do that. It's not usually how I work, though. I do a little bit of that from time to time. That's called Tantra. Tantra is about changing things server-side. Yoga is about changing the character. Tantra is about changing things server-side. Tantra. Could you raise your GPA by a good Sankalp? Absolutely. I mean, I believe so. So, and let's just think about this, like that's kind of from a spiritual perspective, but from a neuroscience perspective, we have good evidence of that, right? So forget about all the spiritual stuff, because who knows what the fuck this guy, like, what does he know? Like, this is some weird hokey stuff. There's overwhelming scientific evidence that meditating on a regular basis, which is basically what I'm telling you to do, improves attention, concentration, and memory. So even if you don't believe any of the spiritual stuff, if you don't count on any of the spiritual stuff, and when I started, I didn't believe any of this crap either. Literally what happened the first year that I studied yoga and meditation, as I sat down, I looked through a bunch of science, and out of all of the practices that I learned, I picked the ones that had the most scientific evidence to support them. And I said, I can meditate 10 different ways. I'm going to pick the one, and like some of them may work, some of them may not work, but I'm going to choose the ones that have the most scientific support. That's the way that I did it. So I think your GPA is going to go up if you meditate on a regular basis. But that's not like some weird, like Sankalp and subconscious, like some weird hokey stuff, man. Like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. Rely on the science.